Claude Debussy is probably a composer that you may not have heard of, but he was one of the most important and influential romantic composers that came through. So he was French, and I call him the Impressionist. He does some things that we're going to use art to describe. The Impressionist time period applies not only to art, but to music as well. And so we'll talk about some of those things. And I will also give some YouTube links for some of these songs that I'll talk about so you can go listen to them on your own. So Claude Debussy was born in 1862 in France, and when he was 8, his family moved from Paris to Cannes in the south of France. So I have here on the screen 2 different maps, and you'll notice that they are very different. Let me take away my webcam so you can see the full thing. You'll notice over here on the left, there's no labels, and there's just a ton of different colors and countries over here. On the right is a modern day map with those countries in Europe, and specifically in Eastern Europe. You see that Germany is fully formed. You've got Poland here, and then Russia kind of is over here. But here, the green is all Russia. And countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia should be up here, but they actually are not. And back in the 19th century, these countries here were not united. They were just kind of separate countries. So back when like Mozart and Beethoven lived, they lived in Austria, which I think is this one. Don't quote me on that. But like Germany, all of these states become unified. You get Belgium up here as well for our modern day maps. And all these countries unified, and Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France, was one big reason during this time. He made a big conquest and conquered, made an empire in Europe there. But then eventually it kind of broke back up. And so this is the era about when Debussy was born into. So moving on. Here we go. Sorry. So Debussy's talents as a musician were noticed from an early age, and so he was enrolled at the Paris Conservatory. Conservatory is just a fancy name for a school of music. And he actually challenged the teachings he received. So back in that time, he was taught about, classical music and conventional ways of creating music and writing, but he actually favored dissonance instead of consonance. Sorry, I should have had my keyboard on already for this. So consonance is essentially when chords sound nice and together and it all makes sense. So like here's a consonant chord. A dissonant chord would be notes that are clustered together and they may be closer, and dissonance can mean a lot of things. So it can mean something as nice sounding as this, or it can be, maybe a little bit more complicated like this. Or it can be super ear jarring like this. So there's all sorts of things in dissonance, and Debussy favored that dissonance, that kind of crunchy sound. And this was the beginning of his revolutionary style of music that he began to compose and introduce. So at age 24, he was offered a scholarship at a school in Rome. And he went, but again, he felt that his creativity was stifled. And the music that he wrote was not appreciated by this school in Rome. The Academy expected, better from such a gifted student. They did not understand, what he was trying to do. It was new, it was different, it was kind of weird, and they thought that it was, not correct. And so this is what I was talking about, Impressionism. Debussy is known for introducing Impressionism and being one of the main impressionistic composers. So some characteristics of this style of music: there are flexible tempos. You can go faster sometimes, slower other times. And that would vary within a small section of music. So over a long piece of music, of course, you're going to have a slow section and a fast section and a moderate section. But within, 2 measures, you'd have all those in impressionistic music. It would also introduce different scales. A pentatonic scale is essentially do, re, mi, and then you skip fa, and then sing so, la. Sorry. Just using those notes. Whole tone scale means there are no half steps. So the difference between mi and fa is very small. There's no note in between there. And ti and do is the same. On the other hand, from so to la, you can fit another note in there, like le. And so a whole tone scale takes all those half steps out and just has 7 notes. It'll sound like this. So that's a whole tone scale. And then augmented triads and added notes. He was also known for doing this. So here's a normal triad. It's a normal chord. Here's augmented. And then maybe added notes in there. And he was known for just adding these things that to us and to our ear might sound okay, but back then, like, this was not what you did. This was breaking all of the rules. There was also a technique he introduced called planing, which is moving up and down the keyboard while keeping your hand in the same shape. For example, if I would play these, I'm just essentially going to play major chords up and down the keyboard. That's an example of planing. I kind of had my hand in this shape, instead of changing it to make notes fit into the scale. So Impressionism and art, you all have visible brush strokes, and they also played with lighting. This, of course, is a very famous painting. And also you had something called pointillism, where artists and musicians wanted to give an idea or of a visual or an oral image of what they wanted to describe. So they started to discover music can make you think of things and give you the impression of something. For example, there's a song, and I'll link this in Google Classroom. The Sunken Cathedral is the name of the song, and once you hear it, it's supposed to sound like a cathedral underwater. And so there's like muffled sounds of bells. It's essentially he pressed down the pedal just for the entire song and let all that music and sound just kind of wash out of the piano. There were crescendos you'll hear as the cathedral submerges. So as the cathedral rises up out of the sea, you'll hear it become a bit more clear and it won't be as muffled. And there's a lot of planing in the song, so please go and listen to that. Some more of his famous music, Clair de Lune, is a song that's used at the end of Ocean's 11. I'm a big fan of that. And so this is used a lot in music. Back when I made this, Ocean's 11 was a fairly new movie, so maybe that needs some updating. There's a song nicknamed Reflections in the Water. Again, a big use of planing. And then there's Arabesque number 1, which uses a duple versus a triple. So if I have a song that uses triplets at the same time as duplets, for example, in the right hand is going to be playing triplets. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Whereas in the left hand, it's going to be just duplets, 1 and 2 and. And so those happening at the same time is actually really difficult for a musician. Takes a lot of practice to do. And Arabesque number 1 does this. So Debussy did pass away in March of 1918 during World War I. I don't think he was involved in the war itself, but the Germans were actually bombarding Paris at the time of his funeral. And so Debussy was a huge composer in the history of music because, like Beethoven, he moved music in a new direction. So it was already, considered the Romantic time period during Debussy's music, but he kind of moved it in a new direction and almost started it on a track towards 20th century music. Because when he was, in his heyday, it was late 1800s and early 1900s. And he continued the development of what we call program music. Program music means that you have music that makes you think of something and it gives you an idea. So when you hear songs that that to you sound like Western music, like I'm talking about American Western, like they understood that music they composed like that, specifically like Aaron Copland. There's another composer by the name of Grofe, Grofe. They made music that was supposed to depict the American West and the adventures, like clip-clops of horses going down the canyon. There's a whole song just about traveling through the canyon. So that's what program music is, and Debussy had he was a big influencer in doing that. So I hope that gives you a good overview of Debussy. Please reach out to me if you have any further questions. Thanks.